Welcome to Life Lessons. We are on number 36, known as parshat Beha'alotecha. We're in the book of Bamidbar, book of Numbers, the third section, where it's talking about kindling of the menorah by the name of Beha'alotecha. So let's first start with an interesting question, because the verse says as follows. God commanded Moshe to speak to Aaron. Aaron is the high priest. And it's talking about the laws about kindling the menorah. There was a menorah in the sanctuary and how this should be done. But what does he tell him? He uses the word in Hebrew, Beha'alotecha et hanerot. If we translate this literally, that means going up the steps. When you go up, the candles, like almost saying that to reach to the candles, you had to go up. Well, everyone translate this is as when you fire up the lamps, when you light the lamps, when you kindle the lamps. But the Hebrew language as it's over here is Beha'alotecha, when you go up, when you rise up. As we're soon going to see what exactly that means. Okay. But before we get into it, and in another section of this parsha, I'll mention an interesting story that they say. So they say about an individual, let's say Jack, he was in the hospital, and they were taking care of him. And then after a few days, he turns to the nurse and he says, I would like to be moved. I would like to go to another place, to another hospital. So the nurse had a lot of questions to him. Says, tell me, is anything wrong with our service? He says, no, I have no complaints. Tell me, anything wrong with the doctors? I have no complaints. Tell me anything wrong with the food? I have no complaints. So why do you want to go somewhere else? So he says, because I have no complaints. He would like to be in a place where he could complain, and he can't find anything to complain about. Us as human beings, we love to complain. And if we're in a place that we can't complain, we kind of a shock. What do you mean I can't complain? Everything is wonderful, everything is nice. Impossible. You have to find something to complain. So in this section of Beha'alotecha, there's an interesting story. And the story is, it says as follows, Vayhi ha'am kemit'onenim. It is beginning of chapter 11. And the people were complainers. It says about the people of the desert, our ancestors, they were like complainers, and then says bad in the eyes of God. God did not like, and then God was upset about their complaints. So that's in general is a question that needs to be asked is, we are talking about here right in the beginning of the journey of the Exodus. Such wonderful things had happened. They had come out of Egypt. They had seen the splitting of the Red Sea, the drowning of all their enemies. They stood at Mount Sinai, saw a revelation of God. All these amazing things are happening. We're just talking barely a month or two since the Exodus. And here, all of a sudden, they're complaining. They're not happy. They want real food. They're not happy with the manna. What's this idea of complaining, and why does the Torah find it necessary to tell us about it? And if we look very careful, the question is even more so, because in Hebrew, again, a lot of things is we have to see how's it written in Hebrew and what the translation is. In Hebrew, before the word complainers, that means mit'onenim, there is another letter, chaf. Ke. What is that? That's a translation like. Means to say like complainers. In other words, not real complaining. So the question is, what exactly is it? Were they complaining? Were they not complaining? If they were complaining, then they're complainers. If they're not complaining, then they're not complaining. So why is the language here? And the people were acting like complainers. Like complainers. So that right away gives us a hint about something different or about a lesson that it wants to tell us. While we're talking here about questions, so let's add on one more. It's interesting, we all familiar and we all know of the 5 books of Moses. And we all know by their names, Bereshit in Hebrew, that's the beginning, Genesis, we have Shemot, the Exodus, or the literal translation is names, Vayikra, being called out by God, where this is Leviticus, Bamidbar, this book that we are, in English they call it Numbers, but really means in the desert, and then Devarim, the words of God as they're being repeated, known as Deuteronomy. However, there's an opinion in the Talmud that really there are 7 books, not 5. So the first 3 is the way we know them. The Bereshit, Genesis, Shemot, the names, Exodus, Vayikra, Leviticus, Hashem called out, God called out. But when we come to this one in Bamidbar, it gets divided into 3. So we have the beginning of Bamidbar, and in our section, Beha'alotecha, that's what we're talking about, all of a sudden this has 3 parts. And there's even a symbol for it in the Torah, that what we would say now, the 4th section will be, the 5th section will be Vayhi bin Aaron. There's a famous verse when the ark was traveling, and Moshe says, "Arise, O God, may your enemies be scattered among those who you hate, among those who hate you, and they flee from you." So there's 2 verses there that always we say them when we open the ark in the synagogue. So that will be considered like a book by itself. And then the 6th one will be, and the people will like complainers. And then the 7th one will be Deuteronomy, where the question is very interesting. Even though I know not too many people know about 7, but the idea itself, if there is such a thing of 7, we know that each one of them has a name and what it represents. So in other words, this 6th one over here will be the book of complainers. And we know that everything in the Torah is positive. Why would we name something complainers or like complainers? Obviously, there's something here with an interesting message about how God has created us and the challenges that we have, and how sometimes how we need to overcome those challenges. Because it's important to know, we mentioned that so many times, nobody was born righteous. That will be a miracle. But through guidance or good education from our parents or from the schools we went to, good teachers, good influence, good neighborhood, that helps and shapes us to what we are. And for some of us that maybe is a struggle, but what it is the struggles were always created. That's what we have to look at it. The challenges are there for us to overcome. And sometimes we shine and we are even stronger due to the challenges. We would have never thought that we had that power to overcome, those instincts to overcome. We would have never thought that way. Okay. So there is an interesting story will help us to understand this whole subject. There is a Hasidic Rabbi that survived the Holocaust. But unfortunately, a lot of members of his group perished during the Holocaust. He came to the United States in the late 40s and started to rebuild. When he started to rebuild, in beginning he was in New York, in the West Side in Manhattan. He had started a synagogue, and one time on the Sabbath, Shabbat, he turned to his son. The Rabbi, his name was Rabbi Shlomo, so he turned to his son, Rabbi Naftali, and he says to his son Naftali, you know, when I was walking to synagogue today, I saw in the park, there's somebody there sitting and he's smoking on the Sabbath. I know this individual from way back home in the city in Poland where we grew up. And way back then, that's not too long ago, when we're talking about the late 40s, we could say like right before the war, he was an observant Jew that kept the Sabbath. And as we know, we do not smoke on Shabbat. We don't kindle fire on Shabbat. So obviously something had happened to this individual. We live in a time that some of us didn't grow up in an observant home, and a lot of these things is like finding out about it, it's like something new. But then there is some that grew up in an observant home and know about these laws. Happens to be this individual grew up in an observant home, but for whatever reason, he decided not to follow. So the father tells Rabbi Shlomo, says to Rabbi Naftali, go to the park and speak to him. Because you know what? This guy used to be a cantor in the synagogue before the war. Tell him, if he comes into the synagogue, we'll even offer him that he should be the cantor. Rabbi Naftali went over to this individual and said to him, my father, he's the Rabbi, he asked me to come to you, invite you to come to synagogue, we'll even let you to be the cantor. That individual started to yell and scream, don't talk to me, don't you know I am so upset. I am upset with God for what he has done. My whole family, everybody is gone. Nobody survived. I'm the only one left alone. And I'm very upset for what has happened during the Holocaust. I'm not interested in religion whatsoever. Get lost. The son goes to his father and he tells him, listen, I tried. He is very upset. So the father says, I understand, but my dear son, you should know it's not really him talking. He said the words, it's the Germans in him, the Nazis, they're the ones that are talking. It's not really him. Next week on the Shabbat, again, this happens, and the same story. The son goes and asks him, he says the whole same thing. I'm so upset with God. Well, don't even try. What are you doing? And the father says to the son, it's not really him talking. He is really a good guy. The real him wants to come. It's the Germans in him. It's the Nazis in him that are acting up. And after a while, every week this will repeat, until finally one time he told him, listen, they really need somebody to be the cantor. So he came. He came once, he came another time, but every time he would say, don't think for a second that you convinced me or you changed my attitude. I'm only doing you guys a favor. After a while, early 50s, the synagogue, as we would say, not just fell apart, but people moved in different directions. This was a temporary solution from after the war. People came, but people were starting to find places where to live. And happens to be that even Rabbi Shlomo ended up being in Borough Park with a big synagogue. At that time, he already created a big following, and over the next 3 decades or 4 decades, he had quite a few thousand of followers. Because his movement has grown so big, So he stopped attending every disciple's simcha, happy occasion, when they got married, or there's what we call Sheva Brachas, the 7 days of celebration after bride and groom get married. There is every evening the family gets together, and it's called Sheva Brachas. And used to be the custom, many Hasidic courts where the Rabbi would come and visit. But as so many were marrying off their kids, so he stopped. Impossible to go visit everyone. But one day, this Rabbi Shlomo turns to his son Rabbi Naftali. He says, I received an interesting request about somebody that really not a member of our synagogue, of our court, and requesting that we should attend his family celebration of his youngest child getting married. And you know what, my son, we're going there. His son looked at his father, but normally you don't go, and this is not even a member of your community. He says, don't worry about it, we're going. So when they came, and they right away put him up front, so the father, Rabbi Shlomo, turns to his son, Rabbi Naftali, and he says, do you recognize the grandfather over here that's sitting by the table? Do you recognize him? He says, no, I don't. So he says to him, that's that Jew from the park. That's the one that you sit and complain, he's angry, he's upset, and then he did a sefer, came in. He's here. That's the grandfather. I says, guess what? Because we kept on telling him to come and invite him and this, so something hit him, and all of a sudden he understood about his relationship, about his connection, and then he wanted very much to start up a family again. So he got married, brought up a family, and this is now his youngest child getting married, and they are all observant. All are following the laws of God. So we never know. But what is it? What is the point? And with that, we'll answer a lot of our questions. Because deep down, inside each one of us, we know what the right thing is. There's no question about this. The complaints are not really complaints. They're like complaints. They're not really complaints. Real complaints is when you feel, I've got no answers, I am so upset, I'm so angry, and you think that you are 100% right, and you're ready to fight and all kinds of things, so you're complaining for the bottom of your heart. But sometimes, a lot of times, the complaining could be from the outside. It's not really a real complaint. You know there's an answer from it. You know there's a God. You know there's a God that controls things. You know there's a God that consoles, comforts, and all kinds of things that we know. Of course, there's questions here and there because we don't understand everything. We're not God, so we can't understand everything. However, when we do complain, it's a whole different story. When an individual that doesn't believe at all, then I would even say, what are you complaining altogether? If you don't believe at all, there's no reason to complain. Only if you're religious, you could complain. If you believe, you could complain. But what's important to our discussion is that usually we have these two types. You have one type is you complain and you really mean it, and then there is the other time you're complaining but you really don't mean it. It's an outside type of complaint. You need your voice to be heard, you're frustrated, so you have to show your frustration, but deep down you know what the truth is. That is the same situation as a Jew in the park in Manhattan that was frustrated, upset. And we could all understand a person that lost his whole family by the Nazis, all killed. and how difficult that is. It's very hard for us even to imagine to step in that kind of a situation. However, what Rabbi Shlomo is trying is to encourage him beyond that, because to see the light and to see the connection that he really has with God, that the complaint is like a complaint. So if we take this idea now back to our section over here, parshat Beha'alotecha, that we're talking about. We write after the two sections that it speaks about the traveling of the ark. And how Moses says, arise, arise, here is God, and all these wonderful languages. And we talk about the people that came out of Egypt from the Exodus, being by Mount Sinai. Guess what? The greater the light is, the greater the connection there is, there's also a challenge and an obstacle. Because as we move forward, from time to time, there's a little bit of a test. Can we overcome the obstacle? But deep down, if we really know what the truth is, sometimes a doubt falls in, but it's a temporary thing. Because when we know what the truth is, we could overcome it. And then if we overcome it, and as we say, we stay with the program, then we see how the truth is there and how it's a real thing. So the same thing here, that's why they're telling us all this. If it wouldn't mention all these stories here and about complainers, and not just complainers, like complainers, we would say right away, there's no hope for anyone. If you are a righteous person, if you are with a program, you were trained that way, you know what to do, fine. But if the minute things don't go wrong and you don't know how to deal with it, and let's say you lost it, then sometimes the individual may think to themselves, well, I am not capable of being strong, and therefore they would give up. So that's why the Torah mentions all these stories to tell us there were greater people than us, giant of people, people that saw the revelation of Mount Sinai. What could be more than that? And they themselves also had to struggle. They also had challenges that they needed to overcome. That's the reason why that's why it says over here, they were like complainers, because they were not really complaining. The real of them wants to do the right thing, but they're just like complainers. So how do we deal with that situation, with this whole situation? We go back to the beginning of the section and with the question that we asked, why does it say when you light up the candles, it says over here, when you go up? What is this idea? So Rashi, the commentator Rashi, says something very interesting over here. It's to teach us a law. That what is the law? When the priest goes up the steps, because there was a step to go up, to light the candles, and let's say he lit the candles, he can't just turn around and go down. He has to wait till the flame is up on all seven. That's why the language is Beha'alotecha. When you fire up, when you go up, make sure that you light the candles till you see the flame. When you see the flame, that's when you go down. We know, even simply speaking, all the time when we see, you could strike a match, you could light a candle, and if you walk away, it's very possible you didn't light anything. It turned up. So you have to wait there. You have to wait, make sure that it is burning, shining. That's what's happening over here. The candle that was made out of 7 branches, they all represent, in Kabbalah speaking, 7 types. In Kabbalah, they talk about there's kindness, there's severity, there's compassion. All, so they categorize into 7, as we're soon going to see. These 7 represent all of the people, because each one is different than the others in specifically these kinds of things. One person may have more kindness than the other. Another person may have a little bit more severity. The other person may have a little more compassion, and etc. So that represents, when we fire up the capabilities that we have for using it in the right way, then it's a whole different story. Now, when we talk about these 7, so it's explained as follows. The last 2 are known as foundation and kingship. So it's explained the first 5 emotions is for the person, how the person is by himself, when he does not need to communicate with anyone out there in the world. If a person is by himself, these 5 emotions will be enough. However, the last 2 are the communication ones. They're the one how you deal with others. Those are the ones that many times where the challenges comes in. When a person is for themselves, so for themselves it's very possible they know what the message is. So that will be resemblance to the 5 books of Moses the way they are. Genesis, the beginning of creation, the Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Fine. But then comes the idea of the last 2, that this is how when we talk to somebody else, when all of a sudden when I have to deal with other kinds of situation, that's where it could be sometimes of a challenge. So therefore, when we come to the 6th book, where it talks about complainers, and the 7th book, that this is Deuteronomy, where Moshe rebukes, in a way, the Jewish people, when he goes over on all the things that happened. Not necessarily this is negative, but this is to help us how to overcome. As I mentioned before, the challenges are there for us to overcome. We may be in a hospital and everything is fine, and we want to be moved because we would like to complain. So that's the idea. The idea of the complaint is to help us out. And sometimes with a challenge, the best inside us comes out. Some kind of a capability that I never thought I was capable. All of a sudden, out of the frustration, out of the obstacle, comes out such a perseverance, an unbelievable strength. And that's what is in the name of this parsha. When you go up to the candle, make sure that the fire is aflame. May God help us that our own candle, our own soul should be strong, and that should help us that ultimate good, the coming of the Mashiach in our days.